Welcome everyone to what is a very exciting day for techUK. It's our Tech and Innovation Summit, the first one we've done, hopefully of many, and I hope you've enjoyed a lot of the sessions that we've had in the past, over the past few hours. I'm Rory Daniels. I'm Program Manager for Emerging Technologies. My colleague Laura has organized a lot of this day, and I cover a lot of our technologies. We do AI, quantum, but dozens of others, from robotics to drones to blockchain to genomics and kind of everything in between. So this is a very interesting panel. I think, personally speaking, one of the most interesting of the day, but I would say that. And it's on Metaverse and Web3. We've done a lot on Metaverse over the past year or two in particular, and there's a lot more to come on Web3 in the new year. But keep checking our Innovation Hub on our website to find out more. But my plan in this is to do as little talking as possible and to let our fantastic speakers do the talking as experts in the two fields. And really we'll be looking at the two technologies, the latest kind of advancements in each, but also kind of demystifying them a little. So just what is Metaverse and what is Web3? The intersection between both of them, all very much with a kind of industry focused, and to make this as applicable as possible to your businesses, your fields, and what you do. So without further ado, I think I just hand over to our panelists very quickly to give some introductions, and then we'll launch straight into the discussion. In terms of sections, we'll start by setting the scene. We'll then talk about the convergence between the two technologies and how they underpin the kind of new internet that we're seeing emerge. And then we'll also throw in lots of kind of really applicable industry applications and examples and case studies and that sort of thing as we go. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Mauricio, and then we'll go through the panel to give some introductions.
Thank you, Rory. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Mauricio. I am the head of product for Midnight, which is a new data protection blockchain being built at IOHK, the original contributors to the Cardano blockchain. I also host two podcasts on the subject. One is in Brazilian Portuguese called Block Drops. The other one is Blockchain Insider by 11FS with the support of Visa. And I'm super excited to talk about Web3 and Metaverse with this very distinct panel.
Here.
Modest.
I'm Christian. I'm a commercial and regulatory lawyer at Wigan, and I specialize in financial services, technology, and audiovisual media.
Hello, everybody. I'm Kate Loxton. I'm an intellectual property lawyer at DAC Beechcroft with a special interest in online brand protection.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Chris. I'm neither intellectual nor a lawyer. But I'm delighted to be here because I'm in the House of Lords, and my areas are all around talent and technology, inclusion and innovation. So really looking forward to this afternoon's session.
Fantastic. Thanks all. So I think to kick off, before we talk about the opportunities between these two technologies, it would be good to have some distinctions as well. So Mauricio, if I can turn to you first, to just explain in a few simple terms kind of what Metaverse is and how it relates to AR and VR technologies in particular.
I think the simplest definition of Metaverse is the emerging or immersive environment for digital experience. I think that's the simplest way to put it. It relates to VR and AR, or virtual reality and augmented reality, in the sense that these are two immersive technologies that enable this kind of either a complete immersive, in the case of virtual reality, or an overlay of a digital environment on top of the physical environment, which is the augmented reality sets of technologies. These are emerging technologies in a sense that they are not widespread. They're still very expensive to some extent. So they're not widely distributed yet. But the number of applications we're starting to see in both AR, VR, some people call it mixed realities, when there's a little bit of both, are very interesting, and not only in the what would be kind of the first protocol, which is gaming, which is where we humans have learned how to get immersed into different realities, but also in industry. So there's plenty of applications and explorations in using Metaverse in the industry as well, especially because that kind of helps make data more tangible and actionable. So it's very interesting to see how something that was really hyped last year, in the sense of, oh, this is going to be a $30 billion industry and all of that stuff, and now we're not maybe not as optimistic in terms of numbers, but the real applications are there because the builders keep building.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, that's certainly something we do at techUK a lot of, is kind of cutting through the hype, or at least trying to, and we see a lot of that in Metaverse and blockchain in particular. So, Christian, maybe turning to you, there are lots of different types of Metaverse, and these terms kind of have flung around quite a lot. Are you able to outline, so for example, the consumer Metaverse, the industrial Metaverse, just what's the key distinction?
I'll give it a go. So for the consumer Metaverse, I think that's what most people think of when they think of the Metaverse. They think, as Mauricio said, it's this immersive environment. And you'll see that through like a la Ready Player One, where you put on some glasses, or as Apple might call it now, Vision Pro, where you put on some glasses and you basically got this augmented reality or immersive reality in front of you, and it is going to change how we socialize. It's going to change how we consume entertainment. And it's going to change how even how we shop online. I think it does have those capabilities, but for our perspective, from an industrial or commercial point of view, there's also a vast array of capabilities there too. We're seeing in healthcare, as I think we might get onto later, massive developments in that space. We're seeing developments in firefighting, where they can have these digital twins, where they can use artificial intelligence, copying over real-life case studies into the Metaverse, and then using that and working out ways to make how they fight fires more efficient. It's fascinating. But there's so many things. I mean, the world's your oyster. But yeah,
absolutely.
Hopefully that's maybe cleared up a few things.
I think it has. Yeah, no, thanks for that. So, Kate, maybe it's worth now coming on to Web3 and the intersection between that and Metaverse technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's probably worth saying that when we're talking about a lot of these things, they are really terms of art and not science. So Web3, the third iteration of the internet, and that is the version of the internet where it's characterized by an increasing reliance on blockchain and decentralization. And the aims of Web3 are to make things essentially a more user-centric experience, and open and transparent. And when we're, it's Web3, third iteration, often called the sort of read, write, own iteration of the internet, and that's because Web 1.0 is the stuff when you look way back and you see the very static, old-fashioned websites where there's no interaction there. The content is just what the content is. Or the version of the internet that we nationally have at the moment is Web 2.0, which is read and write. So we still have the ability to receive the content. We can also write our own posts, upload media, LinkedIn, Facebook. Super excited to be at techUK today. All of those sorts of things. And Web 3.0 being the element where we start to see a move towards more of a kind of creator economy, where there's ownership of the experience, ownership of the data that's produced, and also an allowance there for the interactions in that online space to be rewarded. So yeah, again, bolstering the creator economy. Web3 provides the infrastructure for the metaverse. Essentially, Web3 underpins it all because it provides the digital currencies and the digital assets there, and all sorts of verification systems and those sorts of things. So, metaverse sits within the Web3 bubble.
Brilliant. Thanks for clarifying that. Lord Holmes, maybe we'll turn to you now. And obviously working at the intersection between industry and government, I'm sure there are lots of use cases that illustrate the potential of these technologies really well. Are you able to just touch upon maybe one or two of them?
Sure, thank you. And just to take a step back, in 2017, I wrote a report on blockchain, on distributed ledger technology for public good, leadership, collaboration, innovation. Why did I write that, and why do I raise it today? I wrote it because my fear then was similar to my fear now, that we wouldn't get close to realizing the extraordinary number of opportunities that blockchain can bring us because of the over-connection in the public's mind between blockchain and Bitcoin, and the two being the self-same thing, and thus, in many people's minds, undesirable. Now, we won't unpack that at this stage, but the reason for doing the report was to demonstrate the opportunities that we could potentially look at for public good, common good, private good, through blockchain distributed ledger deployment. Now, that risk still exists, but as the other panelists have already alluded to, I think now we're getting to a stage where we can see some really interesting, really fascinating, and really life-changing, state-changing opportunities, which are often, not exclusively, but often underpinned by blockchain technology. And perhaps the best thing about that is many people wouldn't even know that's the case, because to a large extent it's rightly faded into the background, and it's just enabling and underpinning solutions, experiences, and the like. So, as Maurizio, Christian, Kate have already indicated, there are so many opportunities, thus it's quite obvious that there are almost limitless opportunities with the state across Whitehall. And to put it in really high-level terms, from my point of view, I think if we get this even partially right, we can transform the very social contract, the very essence of the relationship between citizen and state, for the benefit of both. And by enabling so much of this through blockchain, that sense of how we can tokenize uniqueness, and even perhaps more importantly, how we can get even more resource out of existing resources, rather than always having to have that understandable but oftentimes unhelpful argument between politicians, just who's going to spend the most on healthcare, for example. Whereas the reality is, of course, resource matters, but believe me, the only thing which is going to give us, for example, the health service which we need and which we deserve, will be the combination, these technologies, human-led technologies for public good, and in that example, for all our health good.
Absolutely. And Kate, do you want to come in?
No, I was nodding in agreement.
I really like when Lord Holmes introduces the matter of the technology as a public good. We usually don't tend to see that, because technology in general is very private. Someone owns the technology, someone sells the technology to you. When we talk about blockchains, which is the data transactional underpinning of Web3, and hopefully the Metaverse, what we see is that there is an alignment of incentives between the very technical infrastructure and the activity that infrastructure supports. And if we think about that as anyone can run a blockchain node and participate on the public economy, that by definition is public goods. So it's a very, the decentralization paradigm it forces you to rethink not only how you deal with assets in general, but also how you perceive the infrastructure where these assets are being recorded, and how important that infrastructure is for the assurance that the ownership is valid and verifiable. And what's the interesting thing about Lord Holmes's rationale is, when it works, it just fades into the background. Like we right now, everyone here has a cell phone. The internet is working. We don't even think about an IP address that is running on the cell phone. When we nail the new infrastructure, that is going to happen with blockchains. I've been in the blockchain space for almost 10 years. I can't wait to stop talking about it.
Fair enough. I guess that brings us nicely on to the next topic, which is, talking about widespread adoption. There are obviously a number of technical barriers that must first be overcome. Anyone on the panel, are you kind of able to outline what a few of these might be, and spell out whether you think they're kind of whether there's the chance for industry to overcome them in the next few years, or are we talking kind of longer term?
How long do you have? Sorry.
In a short answer.
No, I think there are technical barriers for sure. I think Web3 in general is very jargon ridden. Like if you never heard of anything that happens in Web3 and you read any headline in an article, you're going to get confused because the terminology is confusing. There's new acronyms or acronyms that, even worse, that are being reutilized in Web3 that's different from everything else in the world. So that itself is a barrier for people to understand what it means and how good this thing is. So, and this has been something that is improving a lot, but there's still a lot of that barrier. So that's like one kind of technical aspect. The other one is because everything in Web3 is permissionless, meaning anyone can run anything. The barrier is also anyone can spin out a new blockchain, and that blockchain doesn't necessarily speak to the rest of the blockchain. So interoperability is also something that is somewhat a barrier because business is interconnected in the world. Like we have trade finance all over the world, everything is interconnected. But if you're on a blockchain and I'm in another blockchain, we might not be connected, but the business still has to happen.
Yep.
So that's kind of the second bit of that. But I think the bigger thing about adoption and implications are not necessarily technical. So, and I'm again going to point to Laura Holmes because there is a big work that needs to happen across the world on legislation to enable some of the new decentralized paradigm to make its way into the real world economy, regulation to make sure that there's level playing field, education for sure, because it's a paradigm, not just a technology. So we need to relearn how to think about the implications of this new industry. So, and that is exactly the reason why the UK, Singapore, Brazil, Switzerland can be named as leading jurisdictions because legislators and regulators are actually pulling their own weight in ensuring that this market is going to happen. So it's refreshing to see that activity in not just one country, and there's hopefully at some point no more space for what we call regulatory arbitrage, which is if I'm not too accepted here in your country, I'm going to go somewhere else, do my own thing, which creates problems both for consumers and regulators. So that's, I think, the wider version of not just technical barriers, but a wider consideration on what it takes for the world to come into this new decentralized paradigm.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting you touch upon interoperability. It's something we do a lot of at techUK. We have a working group on it as part of our health and social care program. But something we hear time and time again, how will these technologies talk to each other? How will the experience of browsing on the Web 3.0 be as seamless as it seems today? Not automatically, I think.
No, not at the moment. I think there are work groups around various industry segments discussing interoperability. But more than the technical interoperability, the thing is, and it happened with the internet. I mean, you might not remember, I started using internet in '92. It wasn't as standardized as it is today, but there were things that got standardized and that enabled widespread adoption. Fingers crossed that happens with Web3 as well.
Yeah,
I'd be interested in your take though, but do you not think that these things happen organically rather than, I know that we can rely on the legislature to do their job, but from my point of view, I think that sometimes they've already done their job, and the law's quite nimble in its own way, in that, you've already got the online safety bill, that'll apply to the metaverse and its service providers. It's basically anything that's on the internet is captured. So I just feel like we can talk and we get worried about, what's the future of the metaverse? What's the future of Web3? What's the future of blockchain? We get sort of bogged down in this jargon. But really, is it not just, let's just let it happen, and then we'll just wait on the courts to decide what is the actual legislation behind this? I mean, from my point of view, another worry that I've got is sort of defamation. But at the same time, we've gone through the internet. Where is your jurisdiction if you defame someone on Twitter? It's you defamed me, I'm in the UK, and I'm going to take you to the UK courts because it's out in the open sphere.
Yeah.
I just feel like, sometimes we get too bogged down in, what's happening and all this jargon.
I don't dispute that. I think when I think in terms of standards, standards coming from like organic efforts, they don't happen because everybody's going to have a standard. So that for interoperability is paramount. If we can't agree on a standard, there is an interoperability, and that needs to be deliberate. But for things, as you said, like for things that are softer and not necessarily part of the infrastructure, I think there will be evolution because everything is brand new. We learn as it happens. I bet Kate has a dozen cases on IP that we didn't know that this thing was messed up, and then it happened, and now there's litigation to define it. Right?
It's an excellent point, and I think it's something that I look at things through an IP lens, and this is all of these challenges that we're reading about in terms of it's sort of a really gloomy picture in terms of Web3 and the Metaverse being the Wild West for intellectual property rights holders, and it being this sort of something to dread. I think it fails to appreciate that actually the challenges of technology have been there at every single iteration of change that we've gone through, and in a Web 2 environment, we're getting case law that recognise European Court of Justice cases about geo-blocking technology and things. So from a Web 2 environment, saying there is a fundamental tension here that exists worldwide between what you can do on the one hand in a sort of internet environment, which is global and borderless, compared on the other hand with the sort of rights, regulations, obligations as users that are naturally territorial by nature. So and that is something that's been grappled with an awful lot on in terms of intellectual property decisions.
Yeah,
and there's examples from efforts like in legislature that are very specific that enable the use of technology. Lord Holmes has a good example with the ETDB, now ETDA, that I would hope he could comment on, because that's an enabler, like a clear enabler of legislation enabling the adoption of new technologies.
Sure, and I'd come on to that just to build on what you're all saying. I think you make the point well, and we'll get this wrong if we start from a position of this is all terrible, we need to ban it, stop it, it's going to take all our jobs, we're all going to hell, there isn't even a handcart, or it's all going to be great, leave us alone, don't regulate us, we're pioneers, we're going to the frontier. All of that legislation, all that regulation doesn't apply to us. So two parts to this, I think, building on what colleagues have said. Firstly, we need to ensure that all of the existing statute book and streams of regulation are properly and appropriately applied to all of these emerging technologies and situations as they come through. And then to consider where there may be elements that require additional regulation and additional legislation. And that can be both in terms of being very cognizant of the risks, but also ensuring that at the same time it's entirely possible, and legislators and regulators should always hold these two things in their hands simultaneously, understanding the risks and how to mitigate them, but really encouraging innovation, competitiveness, and that rationally positive approach to be had here. So as Maurizio kindly mentioned, a recent example of this was the Electronic Trade Documents Act. Now, I can already feel people in the audience go, I don't what? God, trade documents? What are you talking about, man? That's boring. I've described it as the most important law that no one has heard of. Now, I already know that everybody on this panel in this room's heard of it because you are at the leading edge of all this stuff. And I'm going to ask someone in the audience to talk us through this. But why do I highlight this act and this bill? For two key reasons here. I believe it's the first time that in the UK, and probably one of the first times globally, that a legislature has legislated for the opportunities of these new technologies. what the bill does, the Act now does, it's pretty simple. It just enables one to hold a trade document in electronic format. Now you're thinking, well, God, sure, that's been possible for decades. Well, no, because they're different to contract. They're possessive in nature. So you hold the paper, you hold the goods. So you needed the technology solution to be in place that you could prove that you were holding the trade document electronically. No one else was holding it, and that was absolutely cast iron. Why it's a lovely piece of legislation. First, it's gloriously short, always a good thing. It doesn't always get delivered in that form. But back to an earlier point that Maurizio made in terms of these things fading into the background, it's a blockchain act that doesn't once mention blockchain, which makes it technology neutral and future technology proof, because it talks about the criteria that any potential technology has to be able to achieve to satisfy that electronic trade document. So it's the beginning, I hope, of a number of pieces of specific legislation that we're going to be doing in this space. We've got something coming through on digital assets, which I won't go into at this stage, but I think there are key ways where we can do specific pieces that are just that add, and they are the smaller piece of it because we have the whole statute book at the moment, and there's a huge questions around IP, and people can go, isn't ChatGPT absolutely fantastic and all these things, as they crawl over the internet happily gobbling up all this information and going, the one question which we should ask ChatGPT is, what do you reckon on intellectual property rights? I have no answer for you.
You want to talk about it?
It's a big question. Finally, before I shut up, years ago, the so-called Section 230 rule in the United States is incredibly insightful in this space. And that was essentially the reg that said that websites were not publishers. Now, that has pluses and negatives, but if we think about the pluses, look what that has enabled in terms of what's now possible across the web. I think without trying to find a silver bullet, there probably are a number of potential, if you will, Section 230s for us in this space and with other new technologies, but always with that sense of only doing exactly what the legislation or the regulation should do and no more, not a jot more, and then enabling all of the innovation and all of that public and private intellect to come through and make all of the great solutions.
Okay, that's really interesting to hear, and some kind of clear examples of international best practice there. Kate, maybe it'd be worth touching upon, so essentially I want to ask you if you're optimistic about the future where we go from a Web 2 to a Web 3 kind of regulation landscape. When you look at NFTs and digital currencies, yep, these are pretty abstract and kind of, crazy concepts right now that may be widely adopted in just a few years. So are you optimistic?
Yes, I am optimistic, and for the reasons that the statutes that we've talked about Browning there. I think there is a degree of fleet-footedness with this kind of thing that you never get some legislation that is exactly the sort of perfect exam question of application to circumstance. That's not the nature of the way that laws have evolved in this country. It's principles based rather than kind of technology specific for the large part. And so in the intellectual property sphere, there are lots of things that I think we see sort of case law coming out of the US tends to lead the charge with this kind of thing for kind of reasons we can all speculate on. But we've seen cases at the sort of intersection of NFTs and trademarks, for example, and sort of online encroachment on intellectual property rights. So there was a case a couple of probably actually, I was going to say a couple of months ago, but it's not. It's more like 18 months ago now. Meta Birkins, which probably rings a bell for a few people in the audience, which was an iconic bag in real life, which was designed and has been extensively sold by the luxury goods company Hermes, and an online NFT seller although he tried to describe himself latterly as an artist, decided to make meta Birkins. So took a picture of the bags, covered them in some sort of, horrible fluff. Google it; they're real, super tasteful works of art. I'm jealous because not mine would have meta unwrapped boiled sweets and meta old bus tickets in and things like that. But what they were saying there was, he was saying, listen, I'm an artist. It just so happens that I'm selling my art via the medium of NFTs. You can't touch me for it. And what that case that was decided in New York, actually, a unanimous jury verdict said was, no, you're trying your luck here. This is nothing more than you trying to exploit the long-standing goodwill and trademark rights of this of a luxury goods company for your own ends. You're trying to make a fast buck from selling these NFTs that people assume are connected to Hermes, and actually in real life, it's going straight into your pocket. And so I don't think that that doesn't need specific legislation to make what we would perhaps, instinctively feel is the right decision there. We can expand trademark rights to cover things that, you apply for trademarks for particular sorts of goods and services. You don't get a blanket right. So perhaps you're a handbag manufacturer or a sports shoe manufacturer and you have trademark rights for the actual thing. You can apply for trademark protection that applies to the virtual versions of those, but rights garnered in real life also, will continue, I've no doubt, as they have done so far, to hold sway online as well. So I don't see it as the Wild West. I think there are certainly areas that are of more concern, and certainly the Advertising Standards Authority and the Financial Conduct Authority is looking very closely at things like cryptocurrencies and those sorts of things. And there are bits and pieces of fine-tuning that will need to happen. Also, education as well, I think, is a really fundamental thing between people understanding what package of rights you get when you acquire an NFT, and that may or may not be that you acquire rights in any of the underlying intellectual property, all of those sorts of things. It's an open question, so the way of solving that is to be more explicit in what you're doing, spelling things out until the general population kind of sort of whatever the young people call it, levels up or upskills or whatever. So yeah, I feel relatively
optimistic. It sounds like
optimistic-ish, but watch it all come down. Yeah, watch it all come tumbling down tomorrow. Yeah,
I'm gonna steal that.
Brilliant. Christian, maybe it'd be worth turning to a different technology that is kind of related to this whole discussion, which is digital IDs.
Sure.
And where do you think they come into the discussion or the solutions here?
Well, I think digital IDs is actually quite related to NFTs, because I think there's a place for them in that. I mean, NFTs has gone through a weird phase, just like Metaverse. It's been overhyped and it's become hated, and people are going, what's the point of it? I mean, valueless, maybe. But I think there's a part where you go, maybe NFTs aren't for, basketball highlights where you don't even have the copyright, but you pay £2,000 for it. Maybe not, but maybe it could be for something like digital identities. And I think the issue that we've got is that this Web3 environment that we're going to sort of find ourselves in is going to require a new level of data privacy. And I mean, you can couple this with the metaverse at the same time, but what we're going to see is your whole facial recognition, your body, your breath. These could all be monetized and captured by various different companies, and therefore we need to have a strict digital identity in place. And I think that's where NFTs could come in. We don't have that in Web 2.0, not really needed. Maybe not, but I think in Web3 that's exactly what we're going to need. And one guy that's been a proponent of this is Vitalik Buterin. I mean, kind of well known in the sphere.
One of these kids.
One of these kids, yeah. I mean, he's dubbed this as the proof of personhood and the unique human problem. And what I see this as potentially is it's going to stop us needing captures. It's going to stop us needing two-factor authentications, and it's going to stop us needing to buy a blue tick on X or Twitter. I don't know if you've bought one, but I think that what we're going to need is some form of certainty over personhood, but also a way for us to control our own data. They work hand in hand, and that's also going to mean that you can now control who has access to your data. And then also, if you want to monetize your own data, then you can maybe take a cut of those profits, which I think is essential. It shouldn't be a data broker that can monetize your data and you don't even know who's got your data. Yeah. In the metaverse, we're going to have an issue, a real issue, where you may not know who's got your data, how much they've got it, and there's a serious amount of data that they could hold on you.
Interesting. You mentioned the ability to own the data, monetize the data. But still, even under GDPR and GDPR-like legislation, regulation across the world, there is also the problem is that once you give someone access to your data, even if you remove that grant, if you remove consent, once the data is shared, then the data is shared. You might need to ask, oh, please delete all my data, the right to be forgotten and all that, which is a legal device, but it might not be a technical device, right? Exactly. There is a new set of technologies that we're using on Midnight as we build it, called zero knowledge. It's a very, very interesting piece of cryptography in which you can offer an answer about a data element without disclosing the data. It's a set of cryptographic instructions, but in essence, I don't need to know you're 18. I just need to know if you're old enough. So it's more of a Boolean answer, yes or no, or within limits, that you can actually verify that the data or the information about the data is true, and you can use that information to run the business. So in that sense, you could actually offer information about the data without giving away the data. If you want to remove the consent, you will, but you never have to share the data in the first place. So that's kind of even another layer of protection for individual personal identifiable information that adds a lot of value. And if we think about the immersive of the metaverse, right? Yeah. You can be anything in a metaverse, right? That's the whole point of immersive experience. I could be just a blob of light with a couple of thumbs, and it will be good enough for a particular game or activity. But is that Mauricio? How do I know if that's, or Rory, claiming that, his Mauricio in a blob of light, because it doesn't resemble Mauricio at all. So having a digital identity would enable the counterpart of that interaction to confirm, oh, that's Rory using Mauricio's avatar, because Mauricio is weird, he's got a blob and, a couple thumbs. But they know that they're not interacting with me, but an avatar that resembles my metaverse imagery, but it's you acting on that interaction. So these things are very important, and as Christian was saying, those are the things that, when resolved, they clear a path for a number of utilities that we haven't even touched them yet.
But it's going to take a while for it to become resolved. I mean, just like anything, the Law Commission has been a leading light in, Lord Holmes can speak to this in greater detail, but the Law Commission has published reports on smart contracts, digital assets, data privacy. And that's then led to the ICO having to take a step back. They did a paper a few years ago which documented the blockchain and detailed its issues, its concerns with the blockchain. One of them being that you can't erase things that's on the blockchain. It's there permanently. And my issue with that is, yes, that's true, but we also need to still regulate it and be pragmatic in regulations. So I think
specific.
Exactly. Well, specific to an extent as well, while being open-minded to future technologies. And I think this is where the ICO needs to take a step back and actually consider what's the commercial rationalization here. So, there's certainly a place for regulation on this.
Oh, yeah.
But they need to be open-minded.
This digital ID question is absolutely critical in many ways. it's an even bigger question than everything around data. And if you needed any support for that statement, look at the fights that are going on and the plays that are going on largely undercover, be it the banks, be it the large tech companies, to get your ID, wallets oftentimes masquerading as the play to get your digital ID, and through that, the ultimate winner takes all. Now, there's no question that a number of the key elements of this new environment is tokens, wallets, digital ID. But we have to ensure much greater public understanding and public engagement. Firstly, that it's our digital ID. We decide what, to who, for what purpose, and to Maurizio's point, in what format. It doesn't even need to be the credential of itself. If you want to get a pint, someone doesn't need to know your date of birth. They need to know that you are, in that jurisdiction, old enough to have a pint. Unless it's a pint of milk, in which case they don't know anything about you at all. You can just have that pint of milk.
Lactose intolerant?
It's a good point. It could be there. But it's critical, because if we have a situation where one or a small number of players corner this digital ID, then we will see similar outcomes to what we've seen with social media, for example. It's our digital ID, and there needs to be digital ID for entities as well as for individuals.
Yep.
And just a hark back to the 2017 report to show where blockchain can help, and again, that resource coming from a resourcefulness, tech-enabled approach. Currently, the NHS spends 25,000 doctor days on assuring the credentials of those clinicians. Incredibly important. You want to know that the person operating on you, the person you consult with, is who they say they are, with the qualifications and the experience they say they have. Critically important. But with a pretty straightforward blockchain solution, those 25,000 days could be melted into minutes, and those 25,000 days could be redeployed into care. That's just one tiny element tying together all those things around ID, but how things could be enabled. But it's got to be, I believe, far more understanding for the public, far more of a sense of self-sovereign and some of the elements around self-sovereign ID, because if we let that slip away, that will be more than largely problematic.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I guess trust is also the kind of key theme that underpins all of this.
Verifiability, I'd say, more than trust. Yeah.
Okay.
I get trust more than verifiability. Should we have a vote?
Let's not.
Everybody who thinks trust after three, say trust. 1, 2, 3.
Oh, come on. It's easier to say, obviously.
Everybody who thinks verifiability after 3, keep very quiet. 1, 2, 3. There we go. It's trust.
There we go. Conclusive.
That was scientific.
That was. But just before I wrap up, I would go a notch deeper on the ID front, which is we're living in a world of devices, right? Yeah. Everything gets measured, everything gets listened to. We don't know which device is doing what and how they're interacting with each other, with our data, which, even though it's my sleep apnea data, it's my data, right? And I think there's, to an extent, where we want to make sure that it's trusted and verifiable. We need to know which devices are doing what to our data, and that goes into the identity of each of those devices as well. And I don't think we talk enough about that yet, because identity itself is a very tough subject. But then I'm sure that in this very room there are more devices than we can count, and we don't know which are they.
Yeah, no, not at all. Brilliant. Well, I hope that you can stay around for the session after this, which is on a kind of realistic case study, deep dive into the NHS and their digital transformation journey around the Metaverse. I'm going to ask our panelists just to spend literally 10 seconds each with, if you had one key takeaway for everyone in the audience here today about the two technologies, the intersection between them, the opportunity for industry, what would that be? I'll start with Lord Holmes and we'll work this way.
Be curious, have your critical faculties to the fore, talk to other people, get other people to engage, massive public discourse, We know everything that we need to make a success of this. We have everything we need in terms of critical theory and thinking, psychology, social theory, economics, politics, philosophy. If we stuff it up, it'll be a human failure, not a technology failure.
Okay.
So, I don't think that was 10 seconds.
9.
I would say this is an area that I think it's tempting to think it's just for crypto boys, crypto bros, or kind of hardcore gamers. But as Lord Holmes says, it's a really fascinating area to delve into. It's not going anywhere. So anytime invested in getting to grips with the technology, the acronyms, the ecosystem is time well spent. And also a plea that this is an area where it would be great to see women being as vocal on the platform as men.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Kristen.
I have to follow that as well. No, I'd say that we've reached a point where the UK government has come out and said that we're committed to innovation in this country, and I think that's fantastic. But we also raised the important point that the US is normally the leading light in technology and innovation, but they tried to censor crypto, and that's just going to censor innovation. I think that we need to be very careful that we don't fall in a similar trap, and that at the same time we are open-minded and pragmatic to the benefits that crypto, blockchain, Web3, Metaverse will have, because if we're not in the front runners to this, then another country will be. Yep. You've got Asia's making massive investment in this. Yep. We just can't be left behind, otherwise we will be.
Yep. Absolutely. Mauricio, 10 seconds.
I agree.
There we go.
After
what
else can I say? Oh, look at that. No, I'm kidding. First is the classic saying: do your own research. Right? Everything. It's way too much. There's a lot of noise, so go deep into the research. And if you're using any of this, start from the problem. Don't start with the technology. Technology should be suitable to solve the problem. So yeah, don't be overhyped in the technology. Don't buy into it too early. Just make sure that you're solving something that's real.
Amazing. Well, in my 10 seconds, I just say that in the new year, we're launching our emerging gaming tech work. These topics, these technologies will underpin all of that. Check out our innovation hub. Follow us on LinkedIn and X, and you'll find all of that information. Or get in touch, rory.daniels@techuk.org, and I'll be the one kind of leading that and doing that. So
awesome.
There we go. What a discussion. Thank you to our 4 panelists. And please stick around for some talk on these technologies, Metaverse underpinning health in the UK. But a huge round of applause for our panelists.